So students, this video brings you to the second part of the German oral exam. As I've said in a previous video, I really divide up the German oral exam, the general questions part, into 8 themes or topics: Familie, Wohnort, Schule, Deutsch being the first 4, and then Hobbys, Nebenjob, Ausland oder im Ausland, and die Zukunft as being the last 4, and the ones that I'm going to discuss very briefly in this video now. Really, when it comes to these second group of 4 topics, a lot of what you're going to say will depend on you. And what I'll run through now, with the help of this little handbook, will be just some general points and phrases that you could use to apply to yourself. And really, when it comes to the German oral, have something to say. On all of these topics, have something to say. It's not enough in the German oral exam to be a boring person, or to be somebody who's just saying, oh, I'm just studying now because I don't have enough time coming up to Leaving Cert. You have to have something to say on your hobbies, on what you do in your leisure time, on whether you had a part-time job or you have one currently, on whether you were ever abroad in any country, and on your plans for the future. One thing I want to just touch on very briefly in this video, because I think it's really important, is if you're asked a question in the past tense, it's very important to answer in the past tense, and building confidence in that is something that we're going to look at in this video, and also building confidence in using the conditional tense or the future tense when it comes to that section on die Zukunft. So let's get into it by having a quick look first of all at Hobbys and Freizeit, or Hobbys und Freizeit. And the question I have written here, and we're just going to run through this briefly, is Was tun Sie nach der Schule, sich zu entspannen? So what do you do after school to relax? I'll just read some of this briefly, what I have written here. I'll use red just so you can see what I'm writing. So ich interessiere mich für Sport und Musik, and try and pronounce those as Sport und Musik rather than the English way. Abends, which means every evening, spiele ich Musik auf meinem Handy oder ich downloade Lieder und setze meinen Kopfhörer auf. Hier in der Schule bin ich Mitglied des Schulchors. So this paragraph is really for somebody who is interested in music. Wir trainieren mittwochs während der Mittagspause. So the choir is during the midday break. Meiner Meinung nach, in my opinion, a lovely phrase, schafft Musik eine tolle Stimmung. It creates a lovely atmosphere, und ich kann vom Alltag abschalten. And that's just a lovely phrase that an examiner would love to hear. I can switch off from the everyday. Das gefällt mir. Again, a lovely phrase. I like that. Ich spiele seit 9 Jahren Gitarre und spiele sowohl klassische Musik als auch Gospelmusik. So here, again, just a couple of things. Students will often say, ich spiele für 9 Jahren Gitarre, and that's not correct German. You have to say, when you're speaking about something you did in the past, up until now, you have to use the German word seit, since, or for 9 years. And again, lovely use there of sowohl als auch, which means both, and correlative conjunctions, really nice to see. Now in terms of sport, here's a paragraph on sport. Unsere Schule hat einen tollen Ruf für Sport, besonders Hockey und Rugby. Your school might be Fußball. Fußball gefällt mir, aber leider, unfortunately, ist diese Sportart hier nicht so populär. Unfortunately, it's not so popular here. You can read through this yourself. I say, jedoch bin ich Mitglied des Basketballvereins, the member of the basketball club, und wir trainieren 2-mal in der Woche. We train twice a week. Ich bin die Mannschaftskapitänin. Now that's if you're a girl. If you're a guy, we'll drop the I in at the end and just say der Mannschaftskapitän. Im dritten Jahrgang, which means in third year, and you have to say Jahrgang, haben wir die Leinster Meisterschaft gewonnen. So we won the championship. Das hat riesigen Spaß gemacht. Again, lovely use of the past tense and the phrase. Hier im Internat gibt es ein tolles Fitnessstudio, das alle Internatsschüler benutzen dürfen. Ich verbringe viel Zeit dort, man muss fit bleiben. Now this sentence would have relevance to a boarding school, but if you don't have a boarding school, you could just say hier in der Schule if you have some kind of fitness center, which understandably isn't in most schools, but you could say that there's one in a studio near you perhaps. But then just when it comes to social media, there's a little paragraph there which you can read yourself. It might be no harm to be able to say something about that. That'll be on screen for you to read yourself. Now you might have other hobbies, and I've thrown a couple more in here just in terms of tennis and art. So what I would say with yourself is have 1 or have 2 hobbies preferably, and be able to talk about maybe the advantages and the disadvantages of sport or music, or why you like the hobby that you've chosen. So looking at tennis, ich schwärme für Tennis und bin Mitglied in meinem Tennisverein hier in meiner Heimatstadt in der Grafschaft Liesch. Meine Freunde und ich spielen oft in Tenniswettbewerben mit. So this means I'm a member of my tennis club in my hometown in the county of Laois. My friends and I often play tennis Wettbewerben, lovely word, competitions. So we often play in tennis competitions. Beim Tennisspielen verbessert man viele praktische Fähigkeiten. So we improve many practical skills, especially hand and eye coordination. So here you can see a sentence like this. If the examiner doesn't ask you what are the advantages of tennis or the benefits of tennis, then you're already going into it without being asked. Maybe you're an artistic student. Ich bin künstlerisch begabt. I'm artistically gifted or talented und verbringe viel Zeit beim Malen und Zeichnen. And I spend a lot of time painting and drawing. Als Kind habe ich oft, was ich gesehen habe, gezeichnet. This is difficult enough to say. As a child, I often painted what I saw. Mein Vater hat mich viel ermutigt. My father encouraged me a lot. Das hat mir viel geholfen. That helps me a lot. Ich male besonders gern Portraits und habe viele von meinen Klassenkameraden gemalt. I especially like painting portraits and I've painted many portraits of my classmates. Ich finde solchen Gemälden sehr anspruchsvoll. I find such paintings very challenging. Now, here an example of this paragraph would be very much a higher end paragraph because there's a lot of past tense in it. I'm going to come and talk about the past tense in just a moment. Before I do that, there are a couple of other sentences here that talk about your hobbies, which you can read yourself. They'll be on the screen. There is the option, I might add just at this point, there is the option in your German oral exam of speaking about a German text or film or a literary piece of some sort that you have discussed and talked about in class. And this is a good option to take up on if you've prepared for it. Examiners are obliged to ask the question. You don't have to do it, but it isn't a good opportunity to say something that you've prepared in the German oral exam. The example I have here on the screen is about the story of the musicians of Bremen, which were 4 animals that were made redundant, and their owners didn't want them anymore, and they travelled, and there's a story about the thieves and so on that they saw, and the robbery that they intercepted, or the thieves that they intercepted on a farmhouse. It's an interesting story, and here is something typical that you could say in a situation like that. Again, as with any of these things, be very careful if you prepare something, be it on this story or a different story. Just make sure that it's not too long, I would say, and that it's extremely clear what you're saying. Sometimes students try to say something that's too complicated and it doesn't come out well, and it ends up being a weight on their performance rather than a benefit. So moving on then to the Teilzeitarbeit or Nebenjob. Here I have given you an example of something you could say. You could say at the top, if you don't want to talk about a part-time job, that's understandable. Im Moment habe ich keinen Job, weil ich für das Abitur lernen muss, aber normalerweise arbeite ich am Wochenende in einem Supermarkt. Ich bekomme manchmal Geld von meinen Eltern, wenn ich etwas brauche. So at the moment I have no job because I must learn or study for the Leaving Cert, but normally I work at the weekend in a supermarket. I sometimes get money from my parents if I need anything. Then you could say that, and you could say I'm not working at the moment. Then I've given you some examples of what you could say if you do have a job in a supermarket or in a restaurant. Be able to say just briefly what you do. A couple examples here you can see. Ich muss die Regale nachfüllen, I must stock the shelves. Ich putze die Regale, ich helfe an der Kasse, I help on the till. And then a couple examples for the restaurant. Ich serviere die Kunden, ich putze die Tische und ich koche das Essen. Be able to say also what you're doing with the money. So here, for example, ich spare mein Geld für nächstes Jahr, weil ich an der Uni gehen will. Ich kaufe Kleidung, Zeitschriften, Süßigkeiten, CDs und DVDs. So magazines and sweets. And again, this little sentence here, if you are going to talk about a part-time job, this little sentence here is actually really, really nice. It just summarizes, it's actually 2 sentences that summarize the benefits of having a part-time job. Meiner Meinung nach ist das eine gute Idee, Erfahrung, das Experience in der Arbeitswelt zu sammeln. Man lernt viele neue Fertigkeiten, so one learns many new skills. Gruppenarbeit und Kommunikationsfähigkeiten. Kommunikationsfähigkeiten are communication skills. And Erfahrung in der Arbeitswelt is experience in the world of work, and collecting experience in the world of work. Now, if I give an example of a part-time job that you're in, and the example I've chosen here is one of a supermarket, you can read that yourself. That's just an example of what you could say you do on a typical day. When you start on a Saturday and what you do. Saturday and Friday. So that's an example of a part-time job. Part-time job is a quite a minor topic. It's not something that's going to take very, very long. We come then to section 7, and Teil 7 is what I call Ausland. Now these are all sections I've made myself. They're not necessarily, they have no weighting other than that. With this topic, it's really, really important that you're confident in speaking in the past tense. When it comes to the past tense, you might see something appearing on the screen now, just about the two different types of past tenses. Of course, there's the imperfect tense, and the two verbs that you use the imperfect tense with are sein, which becomes waren in the past tense, and haben, which becomes hatten in the past tense. So for example, you might say, ich war in Deutschland. That's perfectly fine. Germans would say that in everyday conversation. And you could also say, I had a lot of spending money, so ich hatte viel Geld mit. So I had a lot of money with me. Aside though from those two examples, haben and sein, you have to speak in the past perfect. And this is where the problems start for a lot of students, because they will say, for example, they'll start to make mistakes. We know that verbs of motion always take sein. So this means if you're saying, I traveled to Germany, ich bin nach Deutschland gefahren, you have to say, ich bin gefahren, because you're moving to Germany, you're traveling to Germany. Or ich bin nach Köln geflogen, I flew to Cologne. When it comes to other things you did there then, for example, that you saw a museum, ich habe das Mercedes Museum gesehen, I saw the museum, then you'd say, ich habe das Museum gesehen. So just be very careful on that. And really it does come down to practice. You might think you have it. You might think logically that you've mastered that it's sein for verbs of motion and it's haben for ordinary verbs. But really it's one of those things, you're in the moment, you're nervous, you're under pressure, and students will gravitate to the easiest option or to the mistake maybe. And it's unfortunate when that happens, because an examiner's ear is trained and they can pick that up really easily. So what I have here for you is an example. You could say you went to München, if you did go to München, or you could maybe change it for a German city that you did visit. It doesn't have to be about Germany, by the way. It can be about Frankreich, France, Griechenland. It can be about any country. But if you're obviously not in the country during the German oral, so it's likely to be in the past tense, like you'll be discussing this. And therefore it's a great opportunity to master the past tense. So let's jump into it here and read this. Ich war schon einmal im Ausland, I was abroad. Ich war in Deutschland, in München. So abroad, im Ausland is abroad. Meine Familie hat da Urlaub gemacht. So this is the German word for holiday, like one holiday. So die Schulferien, aber Urlaub, when you're talking about a holiday you did. Ich war 3 Wochen da. So here we see straight away that you have the imperfect for here, but when you come to meine Familie hat da Urlaub gemacht, you're using the past perfect. So let's read on. München ist die Hauptstadt, that's the capital or the main city in Bayern. Es hat mir gut gefallen. Lovely phrase meaning I enjoyed it. Es ist eine sehr schöne Stadt. Ich habe das Olympiastadion gesehen. Es gibt viele Museen und Galerien und Theaters. Das Wetter war hervorragend. Es hat gar nicht geregnet. So hervorragend just means it was brilliant. It was fabulous, fantastic. It didn't rain at all. So what did you do there? Well, es gibt da viel zu kaufen. Ich habe Souvenirs für meine Freunde gekauft. Ich habe ganz viel Schokolade mitgebracht. So I brought home, I guess, a lot of chocolate. Alles in allem, nice little phrase meaning all in all. Waren die Leute sehr nett, aber vielleicht ziemlich leise. So leise is just soft spoken. Es hat unheimlich viel Spaß gemacht. And throwing in these little phrases like it was an awful lot of fun, alles in allem, they just colour the writing as hat mir gut gefallen, and they just make it more palatable to the examiner's ear. If you're asked what are the differences or what you noticed was different there, you could just throw in this. Alles war so anders da. Everything was so different there. Die Landschaft ist ganz schön. Deutschland hat viele große Wälder und Flüsse, which means forests and rivers. Das Essen hat gut geschmeckt. The food tasted nice. Es war anders, aber lecker. Das Brot war ganz anders als bei uns und es hat viele verschiedene Sorten gegeben. So we say in the present tense es gibt. In the past tense you can say es gab oder es hat gegeben. There were many different types of bread. Ich habe viele ausprobiert. I tried many. For example, Vollkornbrot und Brezeln. This is whole grain bread and pretzels. Die Leute essen auch viel Fleisch, besonders Schweineschnitzeln. Nach der alten Saga, andere Länder, andere Sitten. Lovely little phrase to throw in, like the old saying, other countries, other customs. And then if you're asked, is a good idea, es ist eine ganz gute Idee, andere Länder zu besuchen, besonders wenn man die Sprache lernen will, especially if one wants to learn the language. You could be asked then very briefly, and I've covered this in a previous section on school, the differences between school in Germany and in Ireland. You could be also asked just differences in der Gesellschaft in general, society in general. Ich glaube, you could say der Lebensstandard ist in Deutschland höher, die Straßen sind dort besser, aber es gibt viel mehr Verkehr, there's a lot more traffic. So living standard is higher, the roads are better, it's a lot more traffic. Die Familie ist im Durchschnitt, which means on average, kleiner als in Irland. Die Deutschen stehen früher auf und gehen früher ins Bett als die Iren. The Germans go to bed earlier and get up earlier than the Irish. A little section here then on do you like travelling? So ich würde gern ins Ausland fahren. And this really brings me to the topic of the conditional tense. The conditional tense is a bit like the Mo Cúnilech in Irish, and it's used to describe a situation that may happen. It's not a situation that will happen, so it's conditional. And really think of the word if always. If you had the option, would you do this? What would you do? And the simple way to say that in German is ich würde gern, and then plus the infinitive. So here's a clear example. Ich würde gern ins Ausland fahren. So I would like to travel abroad. Again, this is a verb you'd use. Ich möchte, again, part of the conditional tense. Ich möchte nach Russland, Deutschland und Kanada reisen. Ich möchte auch in die Vereinigten Staaten fahren. So this is the conditional tense. Ich interessiere mich für die Leute in das Land. Es ist immer interessant, in anderen Ländern die Kultur zu erleben. This means it's always interesting to look at the culture in other countries or to experience the culture in other countries. Und die Sitten und Gebräuche is really just like the customs and traditions. To get to know the customs and traditions. This brings us on finally to the last section, which is die Zukunft. And as I was just saying, the conditional tense is important when it comes to die Zukunft. It's actually probably more important than the future tense. So to be able to say, there are three examples here, and you'll probably see them coming up on the screen here now. There's three ways you can talk about what you would like to do in the future. One way is just to use the modal verb wollen or ich will, which is a false friend. It doesn't mean I will, it means I want to. So you could say, for example, ich will, I'm not sure what's on screen now, but you could say, for example, ich will Medizin studieren. I want to study medicine. Then you could use just ich will, I want to. You could also say ich werde, so I will travel to Dublin. Ich werde nach Dublin fahren. I will travel to Dublin. This is more emphatic. It's more certain that you will do it. The third way of talking about the future tense or the future is to use the conditional tense, which I just spoke about, and to say, for example, you would do something. I would help people in my career. Ich würde Leute helfen. Or it would be lots of fun. Es würde viel Spaß machen. So you're using würde with the infinitive. So those are the three ways, and I would say keep those very clear in your mind. Those are the three ways to talk about the future. On this sheet, which I'm not going to read through, you just have various scenarios and various sentences you could use to talk about die Zukunft. And as it is with all students, whatever your particular circumstances are, you're going to have something different to say. But I would say take these three sentence formats. Ich will, ich werde, so ich will, I want to, ich werde, I will, und ich würde gern, I would like to, or ich möchte, I would like to really build a little profile, just a paragraph or two about what you would like to do in the future and what your future plans are. Hope this video was helpful to you. You can see the content there on the screen, and remember to also prepare for the first four parts, Familie, Wohnort, Schule und Deutsch, and then these four parts we talked about today, Hobbys, Teilzeitarbeit oder Nebenjob, im Ausland und Pläne für die Zukunft, and give the oral your best shot. It really is good to do well in the oral and to be confident about it. I can still remember my own German oral and how it gave me a boost when I did well in it going into the other part of the exam, not to mention all of the content that I had learned off in preparing for it. So give it your best shot, and you'll be glad you did, because you'll be well set up for the written German exam. Viel Erfolg. All the best.